Hey y'all, welcome to Sandy's Library. I'm Sandy, and this video is part 2 of the Fullers, Marion and Belle. These are my grandmother's grandparents, so if you need visuals, there are links posted in the description outlining both of my grandparents' family trees. Okay, so our last video was centered around a rather touchy subject, and let me just say for the record, of course, owning another human being is wrong. But for me, bragging about it when it's not even true, well, that's a whole nother level of messed up. And, in my opinion, it says a lot about a person's character, and not in a good way. That right there is reason enough not to believe a word that Aunt Allie said, unless it's confirmed by another Fuller Williams descendant. And I'm going to remind y'all, our half-cousin was not a Fuller Williams descendant. His line ran through Willie's second wife. Plus, he's a good 10 years younger than me. But anyway, I'm going to quickly note that the Fullers were not in Monroe County, Alabama in 1865, as our half-cousin suggests. The Fullers were still in the same place they'd been for decades, Butler County, Alabama. The one thing we do know for certain, Marion and Belle married on September 10, 1866 in Escambia County, Florida in the Pensacola area. I showed y'all the marriage record a couple of videos ago. And for 20 years, y'all, I've been trying to reason out why they went to Florida to get married. And here's what I think happened. I don't think Marion and Belle knew each other during the Civil War. I don't believe the Fuller and Hawkins or McClamey families, I don't believe the Hawkins and McClamey families knew the Fullers during the Civil War. But simply because, I just don't think it's possible because they lived roughly 25 miles apart. That's not an easy distance to trek in the 1850s and 1860s. I believe that Marion and Belle met in the aftermath of the Civil War, like my grandmother said. I think the Hawkins family, after the war, had to spread their wings because the McClamey plantation was lost, and it took William Hawkins's tiny portion of the estate with it. Look, y'all, back then, before modern conveniences, life was not fun. It was hard. And for some, it was even harder after the Civil War. Nevertheless, I believe that Marion met Belle during the final weeks of the war, before he was captured on April 26, 1865, or after he was pardoned or paroled or whatever. And while it may have been true that prior to the Civil War, the McClameys were living large, but here's what I was taught about them. They were always getting into trouble with the law, and my grandmother did say that the McClameys is where the so-called Fuller mean streak came from. Her claims are supported by court records too, which has made the McClameys easily traceable for me. There are court records dating back from generation to generation to generation. If a town or the county where the McClameys lived kept records, it's a safe bet you're going to find the McClameys in them. So, I don't have many nice things to say about the McClameys, but they, like William and Caroline Hawkins, were thrust into a bit of chaos in the aftermath of the Civil War, which resulted in them wandering around a bit during the summer months of 1865. At this point, the Hawkins family seemed to split into two groups. Some of Belle's siblings went south into Florida, while others wandered around Alabama until after 1910, when they headed east toward Louisiana. I believe that Marion and Belle might have tried Florida as well, since they were married there in 1866. But according to the U.S. Census, they were back in Monroe County, Alabama by 1870. I don't believe they stayed in Florida very long at all, though, as Marion was baptized into the Lone Star RLDS Church on April 5th, 1868 in Turnbull, Monroe County, Alabama. Plus, Belle was baptized into the same church about a year earlier. I figure they probably hung around Belle's childhood home trying to make a go of things, or, hey, maybe they were looking for silver. Because my great-grandmother Lizzie Fuller was born in Turnbull, Monroe County, Alabama on November 19, 1870. Sometime between Lizzie's birth and the birth of their next child, Emma Cardelli, in 1873, the Fullers joined Marion's parents in Webster County, Mississippi. There's an old family tale that exists about that move from Alabama to Mississippi. And my grandmother Sissy always said she thought that happened about the year 1872. So, they're traveling along in their wagons, minding their own business, when a band of renegade Native Americans gave chase. It's said that, as the natives gained on the wagon, the eerie sounds of their war whoops also grew louder. Belle reportedly became so frightened that she began to pray to God to keep them safe and make their pursuers go away. Yet the natives' yelling and whooping grew louder and louder as they got closer to the wagon. Still, Belle prayed fervently for her God's protection against these renegades. Her prayers fell on deaf ears, though. The more she prayed, the worse things seemed to get. So, as the story goes, Belle gets pissed off. She has Marion stop the wagon, where she proceeds to hop off and starts yelling and cursing at the natives. It's said that the horses came to a screeching halt, where the natives stared at Belle for a moment before turning and taking off in the opposite direction. Our half-cousin says the renegade band did this because he believes they were superstitious about harming an insane person. You think? I mean, let's be real. It's 1872, and here's this crazy white woman who's screaming curse words at you. And even if you don't understand what she's saying, wouldn't you try to avoid her too? Give me a break. That's superstition. That's just plain common sense. Nevertheless, the Fuller family made it to Mississippi, and while there, Marion and Belle had 6 more children in addition to Lizzie. They were Emma Cardelli, born 1873, James Abner, born 1875, John Archibald, born 1876, William Heeman, born 1878, Sally Bell, born 1880, and Caroline Curtis, born 1882. And FYI, she was called Curtis throughout her lifetime. I don't know why, but that's what she was called, and I'll try to be clear in future videos when I'm talking about her, to let you know I'm talking about a woman, not a man. But anyway, so sometime after Curtis's birth, the Fullers moved to Louisiana. They probably moved into the Indian village community first, as this is where Marion's parents, Archie and Betty, had settled. While in Louisiana, Marion and Belle had their last child, Edward Pruitt, who was born in December of 1883. Sometime after Edward's birth, around 1889, the Fuller family relocated to Bray, Ashley County, Arkansas. While in Arkansas, in 1890 or 91, Marion was ordained to the office of priest in the RLDS Church in Ashley County. Sometime in the late 1890s, after an incident that I like to call the Religion Wars, the Fullers returned to Louisiana and settled in the now extinct town of Nash, Louisiana, in Jackson Parish. This place was located about halfway between the present-day towns of Ears and Chatham. And yes, there will be an entire video dedicated to the Religion Wars in the near future, probably within the next couple of videos. But anyway, according to the 1900 census, the Fuller family was living in Jackson Parish, Louisiana. By 1910, they moved just across the parish line into the community of Guyton in Ouachita Parish. Marion and Belle would remain there for the rest of their lives, save a brief stint in Kennett, Missouri, which we will talk about in a later video. When I was a kid, I heard Belle described numerous times as a shrewish kind of woman. It's oftentimes said that she bossed her husband, old man Marion, and she would whip him if he didn't mind her. You know, I can believe that. I mean, she did scare off those Native Americans after all. And my grandfather used to tell a story about seeing old man Marion getting reprimanded by his wife, too. He said that back when Marion and Belle were living out behind my grandparents' house, which incidentally is a house that I grew up in. But anyway, they were living out back where the pine tree grove was. He said that one day when he was looking out the back door, he saw Belle hitting Marion over the head with a stick of firewood. I don't know if the pine tree grove is still standing at the edge of the pasture, but I was told that Belle planted those pine trees, so my grandmother would never let anybody cut them down. Sorry guys, my dogs are screaming. He probably believes that he sees a lizard outside, so he's got to get out there to get it. But anyways, I can tell you that as late as around 2005, the wagon tracks that led from the Pine Tree Grove to the backside of the RLDS church were still visible on the landscape. From where Marion and Belle rode up to church every Sunday and most Wednesdays for prayer meeting. So on April 27, 1927, Francis Marion Fuller died at his home near Eris, Louisiana in the community of Guyton. Here is his death certificate. So I don't know how well y'all can see that. He was 82 years old, 1 month and 27 days. He was listed as a farmer. Birthplace Greenville, Alabama. Name of father Archie Fuller. Name of mother Betty Fuller. The informant's name was Jim Fuller. Looks like Jim. That would have been their son. He had no doctor. He had bronchitis that he says was contracted in Kennett, Missouri. Can you imagine dying from bronchitis? My goodness. So, upon Marion's death, Bella drew a widow's pension for his Civil War service, and over the years she lived with various family members until she died on November 4th, 1939, also in the community of Guyton. And here is her death certificate. Hers is a little bit harder to see. This is Ouachita Parish. That her residence is in Ouachita Parish. It says the reason she died was because of old age. She was 90 years old, 11 months and 3 days. Damn. Yeah, says her father was Billy Hawkins, so I guess they called William Billy, and her mother Caroline McClaney. Yeah, that's her death certificate. Okay, and just so we don't end on a down note, let me wrap up by telling you a story that my uncle, Lawrence Phillips, used to love to tell about when he and my mother were first learning how to walk. And for the record, they were twins. It's said that he would step on my mother's dress to make her fall down. And yeah, he was mischievous like that, so it's entirely possible. But anyway, He said that one day Grandma Fuller saw him doing that. And then my uncle would always grin while at him. And she spanked my butt good for me, too. And then he would always laugh. And y'all know what I realize now? That my uncle's laughter when he told the story was very reminiscent of his own father's laughter, my grandfather. And y'all know what else? It's been years since I've heard either. So, if nothing else, I'm glad that my children will be able to hear me laugh in these videos long after I'm gone. And while this is the end of Marion and Belle's two-part video, even so, I haven't told y'all everything I know about them, so you'll continue to hear stories about Marion and Belle as we move back into my great-grandfather Willie's story, because he does, after all, marry their daughter. Up next, as you might have already guessed, we'll be talking about married life from my great-grandparents Willie and Lizzie, so stay tuned. Until next time, later, Gators.